your seats. We'll be starting shortly. This meeting of the Community Development Board is called to order on April 19th, 2022. Welcome, everyone. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all.
This board consists of 7 members and 1 alternate who are appointed by the City Council and serve voluntarily. I am Mary Lau, and I will ask the other members and the staff to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Mike Flannery.
Ray Holdrecourt.
Andrew Caudell.
Randy Moore, Board Advisory Attorney.
Matthew Minnich, Assistant City Attorney.
Mohammed Abdul Rahim.
Bruce Rector.
Andy Park. John Quattrocki.
Please remember to turn off your cell phones so that they do not become a distraction during the meeting. Please also refrain from having conversations in this room so that we might hear all of the testimony given today. To ensure a complete record of this board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak, including the applicant, speak into the microphone at the podium in front of us, clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. Now I will ask all those in attendance today who plan to speak to rise and be sworn in by the clerk.
Please raise your right hand. If you're going to speak today? No. Are you going to speak? Are you going to talk?
No.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give us the entire truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Agendas of today's meeting are on the podium to your left near the entry door. Also on this podium are a roster of the Community Development Board, the list of city staff experts and their resumes, the board's rules of procedures, and the annual schedule of this board. Our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from the last 2 months' meetings. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I move they be approved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? At this point, this is an opportunity for anyone present who wishes to speak to an item that's not on our agenda to come forward. No one? All right, we will move on to our consent agenda. We have a number of items on the consent agenda for today. This board has adopted a consent agenda format, and the consent items are identified as such on the agenda. Agenda items are those items for which the Planning and Development Department recommends approval. The applicant is in agreement with any proposed conditions, and no written objections to the case have been received to date. Items may be removed from the consent agenda today by a member of the board, a member of the staff, or any person in the audience for questions or objections. I will read each item on the consent agenda, and if any person wishes to remove this item from the consent agenda, please so state or raise your hand, and we will remove it from the consent agenda. Items removed from the consent agenda will be heard in the regular order of the meeting. Items that remain on the consent agenda will be approved with a single vote. Item number 1 on the consent agenda, case FLD 2022-02006 at 2185 Sunset Point Road. Owner is Sunset Car Wash, LLC. The representative is Brian Ongst of McFarland Ferguson. The location is 0.85 acres located on the south side of Sunset Point Road, approximately 600 feet west of North Belcher Road. The Community Development Board is reviewing the proposed redevelopment of an existing limited vehicle service use in the commercial district for the property located at 2185 Sunset Point Road. The project includes a height of 32 feet, provides a minimum of 16 off-street parking spaces, and requests allowable flexibility for use, height, and setbacks. The neighborhood association is Clearwater Neighborhood Association and the Board of County Commissioners. And is there anyone present who would like to remove this item from today's agenda? All right, this item will be removed from today's consent agenda, and we will consider it in the regular order of the meeting. Next item is case FLD 2022-01001 at 207 Vine Avenue. The owner is Christopher G. and Jennifer Coleman. The applicant is Casey Coleman. It's .166 acres located at the southeast corner of Vine Avenue and Jones Street. The board is reviewing a proposed addition to an existing detached dwelling in the medium-density residential district for the property at that address. The project will be approximately 13 feet in height and requests allowable flexibility regarding setbacks. Is there anyone who wishes to remove this item from today's consent agenda? All right, that will remain on consent. The next item is case FLD 2021-11020 at 19709 US Highway 19 North. Owner is CPI Japanese Garden, LLC. The applicant is David Donofrio. Sorry if I butchered that. And the location is 50.037 acres located on the west side of US 19 North, approximately 2,600 feet south of Gulf to Bay Boulevard. The board is reviewing a 1,376 square foot pier in the US 19 district for the property located at the address I mentioned. The project is 130 feet in length and requests allowable flexibility for the square footage of a commercial dock pier greater than 500 square feet in deck area. Is there anyone who wishes to remove this item from today's consent agenda? Right. Our next items on consent agenda are level 3 applications where the board is looking to make a recommendation to City Council. The first one is case LUP 2022-01001 at 1640 Gulf to Bay Boulevard. The owner is MSCW-GDP LLC. The representative is Robert Pergolesi. The location is a .74 acre portion of a 2.26 acre property located on the northeast corner of Gulf to Bay Boulevard and South Keystone Avenue. The board is reviewing a request to amend the future land use map designation from residential/office general to commercial general and to make a recommendation to the City Council. Is there anyone who wishes to remove this item from today's consent agenda? All right. Our next item is related. It regards the same property I just described. It's case REZ 2022-01001, also 1640 Gulf to Bay Boulevard. The owner, again, is MSCW-GTB LLC. The representative is Robert Pergolesi. Again, this 7.74 acre portion of a 2.26 acre property located on the northeast corner of Gulf to Bay Boulevard and South Keystone. The board in this item is reviewing a request to amend the zoning atlas designation from office district to commercial district, and again, to make a recommendation to the City Council. Is there anyone who wishes to remove this item from today's consent agenda? All right. Our next item, case LUP 2022-02002 at 609 Blanche B. Littlejohn Trail. The owner is the City of Clearwater. The applicant is John Jennings, City Manager. The location is a .275 acre property located on the east side of the Blanche B. Littlejohn Trail, approximately 115 feet south of Eldridge Street. The board is reviewing a request to amend the future land use map designation from institutional to residential urban and to make a recommendation to the City Council. Is there anyone who wishes to remove this item from today's consent agenda? All right. Our next item is related to this same property, case REZ 2022-02002 609 Blanche B. Littlejohn Trail. The owner is City of Clearwater. The applicant, again, is John Jennings, the City Manager. It's the .275 acre property located on the east side of the Blanche B. Littlejohn Trail, approximately 115 feet south of Eldridge Street. And the board is reviewing a request to amend the zoning atlas designation from institutional district to low-medium density residential and to make a recommendation to City Council. Is there anyone who wishes to remove this item from today's consent agenda? All right, may I have a motion with respect to the two Level 2 applications that remain on the consent agenda?
Just level 2. No.
Yeah, that would be items 2 and 3.
Okay. I move to approve item case number FLD 2022-01001, in addition to FLD 2021-11020 on today's consent agenda based on evidence in the record, including the application and the staff report, and hereby adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law stated in the staff reports with conditions of approval as listed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Those items are approved. If I may have a motion with regard to the 4 Level 3 application items on the consent agenda.
I move to recommend approval of the items based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report. Of items, case LUP 2022-01001, case REZ 2022-01001, item 6, case LUP 2022-02002, and item 7, case REZ 2022-02002.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We will now move on to the regular agenda. The case today that we will be hearing is a quasi-judicial type of case. All Level 2 cases, such as flexible development, are considered quasi-judicial hearings. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board reviews the application, the staff report, correspondence, and all evidence presented today and makes a final decision subject to appeal. This board has previously qualified all of the city staff who will testify as experts in their areas of professional training, education, and experience. The list of city staff experts and their resumes are in the handbook on the podium near the entry door. Any other professionals who desire to be qualified as an expert witness shall so request at the beginning of the case and present a resume to each board member. The board shall determine whether or not to qualify the person as an expert and in what field of study. At the beginning of each Level 2 case, I will ask for anyone who wishes to request party status to come forward and state your reasons. Party status may be granted if the person requesting such status demonstrates that he is a substantially affected person. The board will then determine whether or not to grant party status. The case will then proceed as follows. Request for party status, presentation by planning and development staff, 10 minutes maximum, presentation by the applicant, 10 minutes maximum, presentation by persons with party status, 5 minutes per party maximum, cross-examination of witnesses by planning and development staff, cross-examination of witnesses by applicant, cross-examination of witnesses by persons with party status, comments by the public, 3 minutes per person, closing remarks by planning and development staff, 3 minutes maximum, closing remarks by persons granted party status, 3 minutes maximum, closing remarks by the applicant, 3 minutes maximum, closing of the public hearing, discussion, and vote by the board. Today, we will be reviewing case number FLD 2022-02006, 2185 Sunset Point Road. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to request party status regarding this item?
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Gross. I represent the Raintree Village condominium, which is the parcel directly adjacent to the proposed development area.
All right.
I would request party status.
Is there a motion to grant party status to Mr. Gross?
I have one quick question, actually. Did your client receive notice of this meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a motion to grant
I
party
move.
status?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything, Mr. Flannery? To make the motion? Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to request party status regarding this item?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Joan Bigler, Bigler, and I live at Raintree Village. Can I speak now, or?
We're going to, you'll have an opportunity
Oh.
in the order that we indicated.
Okay.
Did you receive a notice of today's meeting?
I did.
All right. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion regarding granting party status to Ms. Bigler?
I move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Bill Johnson. I'm Vice President of the Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition. We received notification in accordance with the requirements of the Development Code.
All right. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to grant party status to Mr. Johnson?
So moved.
Second?
Wait. Did the alternate make the motion? Did who made the motion?
I did.
Because there are 7 members present, you have full rights to debate and speak on the matter, and deliberate, but not to vote, so we need somebody else to make the motion.
I move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Is there anyone else who would like to request party status regarding this item? All right. The granting of party status entitles those of you who have been granted party status to personally testify, present evidence by documentary submittal, present witnesses, conduct cross-examination of any witness, present argument, and appeal the decision of the board to a hearing officer or circuit court. We'll begin with the presentation by the Planning and Development staff.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would ask that you accept Ms. Ella Crandall, and the board as well, as the board should accept Ms. Ella Crandall as an expert in general planning, zoning, annexations, land use, rezoning amendments, comprehensive planning, site plan analysis, and land development code amendments, land development code matters, special area plans and overlay districts, site plan review, tree rating and assessment and inventory, tree preservation techniques, erosion and sediment control for construction, Florida grades and standards for landscape material and trees, International Society of Arboriculture standards.
May I have a motion to grant, to accept her expert status? Right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Ms. Crandall?
Good afternoon. So the project before you is for the property at 2185 Sunset Point Road, and this is for the redevelopment of an existing car wash, which per the Pinellas County Property Appraisers was constructed in 2000. I think it should be noted this was originally approved under a prior code, as our current community development code was largely adopted in 1999. So the subject property is zoned commercial, and if we could have my PowerPoint pulled up, that would be helpful. Yes. Yeah. There's the subject property. So the property is zoned commercial. This is indicated by the blue box on the red, and it is also directly abutting the medium density residential to the west. So generally, the commercial zoning code has 3 tiers. You have minimum standard development. If you're a permitted use and you meet those development parameters, you go to building permit. Then there's 2 tiers of flexibility. So this project is classified as a limited vehicle service. And for that use, it is required to be a level 2 flexible development, which is why it is before you today. So this is the survey of the property showing the existing conditions. So generally the proposal is a redevelopment, it's a partial demolition and an addition, generally removing 5 of the bays and reconstructing it as 1 automatic bay with building facade improvements and landscape improvements. So this is the survey, and then that's the proposed site plan, where generally it's staying within the same footprint of the impervious structures. Mechanical equipment is being relocated to the side and the rear and will be screened. There's also significant landscaping improvements shown. This is a portion of their landscape plan showing the new material. It also shows the large existing oak trees on the west property line. So that's the top of the slide. These are the proposed elevations. It should be noted that signage is not submitted, it is not reviewed, and it is not approved through the Community Development Board process, which is why there's no signage shown here. The project is requesting allowable flexibility as a comprehensive infill redevelopment project, which requires architectural detailing such as a variety of materials, colors, textures, and distinctive roof forms, which they have proposed. Staff is recommending approval with 13 proposed conditions of approval. The majority of the conditions of approval are pretty standard in general, but I want to bring your attention to conditions of approval 4 and 5. There has been a lot of discussion at the Development Review Committee meeting, after the meeting, and recently about buffering. So we have a commercial property next to a residential property, and that always creates concern with buffering. We have these two conditions which focus on providing additional buffering on that west property line. I want to point out there is a utility easement on that west property line, which makes it a bit challenging when we are trying to figure out what's the best buffering we can get. The condition of approval generally is proposing a minimum of a 4-foot tall PVC fence to be out of the easement as required by engineering, and along the drive aisle, and to limit its impacts to those existing trees. Retaining those existing oak trees would be very beneficial for buffering. The reason a PVC fence was also recommended is to keep those trees, you need to keep their roots. And the posts for a PVC fence are far less impactful than, say, a masonry wall. So that's a very important condition of approval, and it's also important to note kind of balancing that with the easements and what can be done there to buffer it. The condition of approval recommends a minimum of a 4-foot tall fence. I believe there's been discussion, and I've talked with the representative, is open to a 6-foot tall fence to help with that buffering. I'd also like to introduce some city staff who reviewed and was involved in this project, including David Ojeda from the engineering department, and we also have Gina Clayton, the planning and development director, and Lauren Matsky, the assistant planning and development director. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
May I ask of council, I understand that signage is handled by somebody else, but when we're thinking architecturally about the site, are we allowed to consider what a sign would look like? I mean, could you, I would just like to clarify that right now. I mean, if it's one thing to have a building, it's one thing to have a giant sign that we can't look at. Maybe it's going to be 30 by 80 and cover the whole building. I just have no idea. Are we allowed to think about what a sign could look like, not the sign itself?
Short answer, no. Longer answer, that is not to say that the signage is not independently reviewed through a separate process such that somebody could run amok with your code and plaster the entire side of a building and several billboards and everything else. There are sign restrictions. That is not the charge of this body in this hearing.
Has there been any consideration about the noise impact?
I mean, I think the whole consideration with buffering the commercial to the residential was kind of for the whole gamut of, buffering. I mean, I think that's where the fence, keeping the existing trees, I think is very advantageous. I mean, it's kind of buffering in general.
The reason why I ask is I noticed in one of the documents it shows the traffic, peak hour traffic, almost triples. Did I read it right?
For traffic impacts, I would direct you to engineering.
Yeah, so that's why I was asking about the noise, not the traffic on the street, it's the traffic on the property itself. So I was just curious if because of that, if you maybe do something else, like you said, the 6-foot fence maybe would help with that or not?
I mean, the 6-foot fence could help. I mean, vegetation, I think, helps.
I have a question in reference to, have there been any prior complaints on the existing property now?
Currently, there are no code violations on the property. I mean, the car wash has existed for what, approximately 22 years. So I'm not aware of, again, I'm gonna look up city records for code violations. So I mean, they seem to have functioned well.
Okay, and we are staying on the existing footprint of the property, right?
So the proposal is very much to stay within the existing footprint of the impervious surfaces, so the driveway. I mean, the building is, there's a demolition of part of those bays, and then it's being, here, I can go back to the site plan kind of shows where the addition is to the rear, to the south, so away from that adjacent residential, and then further to the south.
I mean, one could argue, though, that this is much more than what is there now as far as cars going in and out. I think it's what, a 4-stall now, 5-stall?
It's 6 bays now.
6 bays, okay. You know, when you think about, and it's hand done, so it's a lot slower kind of thing. So it's not like there's going to be a stream of cars in and out of the, you know. But like I said, they've done a great job as far as trying to, I was just wondering as far as, you know, the noises and that sort of, and lighting for that, that's another issue. Because how late does this stay open?
So the city doesn't regulate hours of operation, so that would be a great question to direct to the applicant.
And as, I know there's a car wash there's a restaurant next time I park at when I'm eating lunch. And there's a system like this where there's a place where you vacuum your car and you can do all this other stuff. It's not just a car wash, it's a whole deal. Is that what's also here? Is that you vacuum up your car and you do lots of things in the spaces and you put money in here and that, or is it just a drive-through like at a gas station or something?
So I believe the existing, car wash has that now. You can see it in the front. And so they are relocating it and the mechanical equipment to those parking spaces to the side of the building. If you can tell on the site plan, oh, you can see my mouse. Kind of in this area.
So all the equipment is being moved to the south side of the property and as far east as they can get it. And it looks like the only thing that's over there is the Walgreens and a storage facility. So that should help as far as mitigating sound from the equipment. As far as mitigating sound in the car wash, noise of operation, is there anything in there for mitigating that?
Like mitigating the car wash itself as it operates?
Just the sounds. The car washes tend to be a little bit noisy only because of the air drying the fans. Other than that, they're not very noisy.
So I mean, during the review, we review it against the code requirements, so there's not a specific noise buffering for car washes. But again, a lot of discussion was just the general buffering of commercial next to residential, kind of the whole gamut. So I mean, I don't have a specific code thing to say this is what's required to buffer car wash for sound. Yeah, I understand,
We do
bring the
know that
elevations
we're putting up that fence, and then we also know that the car wash is going to be further away from where it currently is now, and further away from the residence.
Can you bring up the elevations again? So that's the east exterior. So the side that faces the residential is actually a solid wall, so that those sounds would be mitigated. If that's the eastern elevation, that would be looking at the Walgreens. So that answers my question.
yeah, so the west elevation facing the residential would be a solid wall.
Okay, that answers my question.
And what are those two?
I just dropped some.
Oh, okay. Over in the court. What are the two blue top height things? What are those for?
I don't want to speak on behalf of the applicant and representative, but the comprehensive infill redevelopment project criteria require distinctive roof forms, and so I believe that is their response to the requirement for distinctive roof forms.
So it's an architectural element, that's all?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
It's
We'll
not,
let the
it's not,
applicant clarify that.
but
it's
I
not
would-
required mechanically.
I
We'll let the
would
applicant-
suggest, yeah, directing that to the applicant. I can't speak to the functionality of their mechanical equipment.
I sort of asked that because I've been driving through some of the ones we've done recently. And after they're built, they sure look different than what I thought they were going to look like when you see, wow, that's there. That wasn't in the plans that we saw before. It was much more obvious from away from you looked around from something than when it was when we saw the actual plans. So I'm just trying to learn from experience.
I noticed there was the traffic exiting the facility can turn, go behind Walgreens, is that correct? And is there any concern about that?
So there is an existing cross-access agreement between this property and Walgreens to the east, and that is remaining. They have a shared curb cut, they have a shared drive access.
Okay, I was just, yeah, because there's also behind the building too, is also that part of because that's how people can get, instead of
Yeah,
going back out to Sunset. they
You're
could then
discussing
go-
right here. Right?
Yeah, in that area, yeah. So they can get behind, they would go behind Walgreens and then exit to Belcher that way. And I don't know if that's, because it's Walgreens property, I didn't know if they had a issue. I guess not.
That's kind of covered under, I mean, I would suggest that it's under their existing cross-access
Sure.
agreement they
Okay.
have with the neighboring property.
Yeah, I've actually used that car wash, so I know the flow.
Anything else, board members? All right, we'll have a presentation by the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brian Oak, 625 Court Street. Before I start my time, I'd like to ask the board to accept 2 expert witnesses. And I'm just going to use the overhead if we can switch to that, please. Thank you. We've got first Michael Palmer, civil engineer from Synergy, who's testified before the board many, many times, and I do have his resume here. He prepared the civil engineering elements of the site plan.
Is there a motion to accept it?
Can we see that?
Person?
Yes.
It doesn't show up on the screen, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If it's on the screen, I'm okay.
Yeah,
There we go.
yeah. It was,
I move that we accept Michael Palmer as an expert witness.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
and, oh, sorry, go ahead.
All right.
Next is Mr. Aaron Coyne, architect, registered architect, state of Florida, with Oliveri Architects, and he did the architectural elements of the site plan, the screening, and the architectural features of the facade and elevations.
All right, is there a motion to accept Mr. Coy as an expert?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. Brian Ungst on behalf of the applicant Sunset Car Wash LLC. And I just want to start out by going back to the elevations. Keep in mind, this is an existing use, and everything about this application reduces the intensity and density of the existing use and provides significant additional landscaping, buffering, architectural features and elements that will not only improve this property, but improve the impact this property has in the entire community, and hopefully lead to some redevelopment of those other commercial properties, the self-storage facility, the Walgreens, and make that whole corner on Belcher and Sunset Point more attractive and better for the neighbors and visitors alike. So this is the residential side of the site. Currently, there are 6 bays, and the closest bay is 20 feet from the property line. This building is 1 automatic bay, and it is over 100 feet from the property line. I wanted to go right into the traffic counts as well. So just to clear up any misunderstanding, this proposal results in a net reduction of 1,202 trips per day from the current use, and it results in a net reduction of 99 peak hour trips. This was generated by Michael Yates, who is a traffic engineering expert at Palm Traffic Engineering, and was submitted as part of our application. It's part of your application submittal. It shows that the current use results in 1,982 total trips, and the proposed use will result in 780 proposed trips per day. Current use has 155 peak hour trips, and the existing use has 155 peak hour trips, and the proposed use has 78 peak hour trips. Also like to keep in mind, this brand new car wash, this car wash that exists is 6 bays, and it's 24 hours per day. This new car wash is going to be automated. All of the noise is interior to the building based on the new equipment and new design. It's much more efficient. Cars aren't going to be streaming in and streaming out and staying there for 30 minutes with their boom boxes. They get in and they get out much more quickly in an automated system. And this building will only operate, during essentially sunlight hours. These automated facilities are not 24 hours a day. You don't pull in and vacuum at 2 in the morning, where currently you can do that. Again, the use itself will be significantly improved. I do want to address the residential buffer. So this is the existing residential buffer. Again, this bay, the closest is 20 feet from the property line. There is a 10-foot easement that the city will not allow us to put any structures in. So when we first submitted, I think you're going to hear about this, when we first submitted, we proposed, a wall or a fence, but it was encroaching into the easement. And so the planning staff said, hey, we want a wall, we want a substantial wall. And the engineering staff said, we cannot put anything into the easement. And so the alternative suggestion that was a compromise between the two departments was a PVC fence on our side of the easement. So basically, right here on our side, on our property, on our side of the easement, we would put that 6-foot tall PVC fence. We are open to a different type of structure, those types of things. We're even open to building a structure on their side of the easement, on the Raintree side of the easement. But we can't civilly engineer that here today and site plan it and take it before planning and take it before engineering and say it's not going to impact any of the trees, it's not going to encroach into the easement. And again, we just kind of heard from Raintree's representative about an hour and a half before the hearing. So we're not prepared to commit to that, but what I'm prepared to tell you is we're absolutely open to anything that works for the city, works for Raintree, and works for the applicant. At a minimum, what we're agreeing to is that condition of approval is a 6-foot high PVC fence on our side of the 10-foot easement, which is what the city staff has accepted based on the fact that the planning department has significant concerns about damaging the existing trees and the existing tree roots, and the engineering department has significant concerns about encroaching into the drainage easement, the utility easement. So to give you a better understanding, these are the six current bays. There are vacuums right now that are relatively close to the residential that are being removed and are being replaced by much more efficient vacuums that are going to be farther away. This is the vacuum that's closest to the residential. You can see that's the residential property line, and that's the existing vacuum. So that's going to be removed. This portion of the building is the only portion that will remain, and that will be where the new automated car bay will be, and the vacuums will be on this side of that car bay. Some additional pictures of the rear of, actually it's still the front of the lot from the Walgreens side. So here I'm moving back towards the south along the western property line just to show you how significant the landscape buffer currently is. There are very, very mature trees that are, these trees appear to be over 40 feet tall. So there is already significant landscape buffering on that portion, and I know the city's concerned about not damaging those. And then this is a picture of the rear of the property. You can see the self-storage facility here and the Walgreens here. So again, for the conditions of approval, we're absolutely fine with the PVC fence, 6-foot high minimum on our side of the property. We're absolutely fine with additional landscaping. as determined by the city to mitigate any other issues. Once again, this property currently operates 24 hours a day. This new design will be over 100 feet away from the residential property line, will be more efficient, quieter, and will only operate during sunlight. So I believe all of those things meet and exceed all of the approval criteria. At this point, I'd like to ask Mr. Palmer to come up and answer a few quick questions. Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Were you the civil engineer that designed the civil engineer elements of the site plan?
Yes, I am.
And in your professional opinion, does the submittal today before the board meet and exceed all of the approval criteria for a comprehensive info project?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and has the site been designed to mitigate any impacts of the use on the neighboring and abutting properties?
Yes.
And would this use have less of an impact on the abutting properties than the current use, in your opinion?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Coy? Mr. Coy, were you the architect that designed the elevations and the facades of the proposal?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and I know Mr. Flannery particularly had a question, I'm going to put the elevation back up, on the architectural features on the roof of the structure. Can you just describe what those are and what the purpose of that is?
So those are just architectural features. There's no mechanical up there or any sort of habitable area, if that's the question, so they're purely aesthetic.
Was the purpose of that to meet and exceed the comprehensive info requirement to have interesting and architecturally designed rooftops for comprehensive info projects?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and in your opinion, does it meet that criteria?
Yes, it does.
And in all other respects, in your opinion, does this proposal meet or exceed all the approval criteria for comp infill?
It does.
Okay, and from an architectural perspective, in your opinion, do you believe it has less of an impact on the current use on the abutting properties?
It does.
Okay, thank you. I hope I addressed most of the questions that I heard earlier. The existing light poles are going to remain, so the lighting is not going to change. There is a lighting section of the code, section 3-1302, which we will absolutely comply with. Again, there will be no additional or new light poles. There will be some lights associated with the vacuum bays, but those will not be operating, at night after sunset. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those, and I'd like to reserve the balance of my time, if I can, for rebuttal.
Questions? Mr. Owens, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted, for clarification, do I understand that you are recognizing that you're open to additional discussions about alternatives for the property line between your property and the neighboring residential area, but with respect to the PVC fence that is in this condition number 4, do I understand that you're prepared to commit to a minimum 6 foot?
Yes, ma'am. We have no problem with that whatsoever.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Back to council again. I don't know if there's a problem. I just want to repair my own thinking for this. I don't know how I really think about it, but to me, the reasons for the blue roofs up there is signage. It makes it distinctive when you're driving down the road. You see this. I've seen a couple of other places where you see they're a way to recognize the site as you come down the road. And or is that signage, or is this? I mean, it's an architectural element, but it's sort of like it could be or could not be. It's identification, like what's on top of a Taco Bell or something like that.
I have Mr. Jallo here, the owner, to answer that, but I can tell you for certain that is not signage. There will be no signage on those architectural elements.
I mean, say it serves the purpose of signage. It identifies do your other ones have this on? Do you have more of these and they all have these blue tops?
The blue tops, so we, sorry, Madam Chair and members of the council, Christopher Jallo. We have another express, Jallo, Jallo.
What is your connection with the project?
So I'm the project owner. My family's owned the existing parcel since it was built as a car wash. Full disclosure, I am a licensed attorney. My specialty is construction, commercial, and complex residential. We develop properties all throughout Pinellas and Hillsborough County. We currently have an express car wash ground up, not a remodeled use, on 4th Street in St. Pete. It's currently under construction. All of our codes, our signage, all of our signage will always meet the code requirements of the county and the county's code requirements as I know as a property owner, you want large signage, a lot of property owners do, so people can see it and it's visible. A lot of that has to do with night operations, because you want it nice and bright at night when people drive by and they can see it. Again, as Brian did mention, this is not a type of use that is operated at late hours of the night or after sunset generally. There's obviously going to be signage on the building per the code. There'll be signage, there's currently signage on the building now, and there's signage on the roadway. We can assure you we will not exceed or attempt to exceed the code requirements. And that architectural element you see there, if there's any signage that is, because of the new design, the only place to put building signage is going to be at that exit area. So there will be a standard car wash, or the name that we choose for it, car wash sign somewhere above that entryway. Now, because of the fact that that is not subject to today's hearing, and we were advised expressly to remove any signage from our initial concepts, we never went forward with engineering it. So I apologize, I cannot unequivocally tell you that today, but there will be some signage, see the trees right there in the front top right corner? There would be some signage there that will say car wash. But again, it's not going to be the entire length of the 120-foot tunnel on the side. It's going to be your standard everyday signage that meets the code requirements of the city right now.
And I think it's important to note too, this is the view from Sunset Point. So the landscaping is designed essentially to shield the bay from Sunset Point, from view from Sunset Point. So there will be a monument sign, a small code compliant monument sign on Sunset Point, but any signage that would go over the bay would only be visible really once you get onto the property, either once you move into the Walgreens easement or once you're onto the property from the other ingress egress. But I think in short, to answer your question, Mr. Flannery, those architectural features were required by the city to meet the comp info requirement. So that's why they're there.
Really, I don't want to belabor this. The focus of this is from a distance. How does this look if you're way down the road and you're driving past Raintree or whatever? And what do you see, a village, or do you see a big high blue things sitting up in the air, which serves essentially to tell you that it's there, so you can see it for half a mile away. And which I sort of think is why I call it a sign, is because it's doing the same thing. There's that, American flag, they put them way up in the air, not because it's so patriotic, but because it's not a sign, but it is a sign. But I'm just purely asking if it's not architecturally required, and is it going to damage the view from our view? We have, I think, concerns about how it looks. And so I'm just asking, do we have a concern about how it looks? And I don't know how it looks. I got to think about it a little bit. So that was my crux of my question.
Understandably, and again, I do develop properties, not just in the city of Clearwater. I have them in the city of Tampa, Dunedin, Palm Harbor, Oldsmar, Clearwater, Tarpon Springs. This is not an uncommon requirement that the city's comp infill, that they would like architecturally designed roofs like that. We always try to meet them and go above and beyond what the city wants. Actually, the minimal standards. Cities want generally even more architectural elements to it. And I can assure you, it's a significant cost to a developer like me to add that on there. So there's a lot of developers that will fight tooth and nail to get at or below the minimum standards, to get it to scoot by because of that added cost. You're dealing with structural and engineering elements. Steel is at an all-time high. It's probably 200, 300% above what it was pre-COVID. So it's from a cost economical standpoint, I would want it to be reduced. Or you see some of these remodels, including express car washes, going on all around Pinellas County and in Hillsborough County. Some people redevelop them, and they just basically knock down a wall, slap some new paint on it, and voila, redevelopment. We generally do not do that as property owners. If we're going to redevelop a site, we want it to be, as Brian had mentioned, a significant improvement for the community, not just myself and my bottom line pricing. But you're not going to be able to see those elements from the neighboring property. As you can tell, there is significant buffering, pretty tall buffering, taller than I think what this building height would be. From a signage perspective, again, you're not going to be getting these neon signs that are gonna be flashing on top of these elements.
Yeah, I
So-
wasn't expecting that, no, I wasn't. I know they're going.
Yeah, we're not putting them there so people, when they drive by, see it. It's been there for 22 years. People know there's a car wash there. It's not open at night to where we need to attract people to it that couldn't see it otherwise. So for us, it's just what we thought was an architectural improvement that the city wanted, which is why it was installed.
Thank you
or
very much.
provided.
That's answered my question.
To Mr. Finley's point, is there lighting in those architectural elements?
At this juncture, no. I know that's a common feature in a lot of new architectural designs that we've had cities, including City of Tampa and some others, that want us to put low level. They're not projecting lighting out, but when you look at them, you see a strip of light because it adds that architectural element to it. So again, from an architectural standpoint for comp infill, it didn't require the extent as the site planning required. So we haven't gotten to a lot of those details on the architectural elements. It really was just elevation at this point.
And as far as the site lighting goes, after hours, is there any way of these dimming lights or turning off lights or that sort of thing after hours?
So Aaron could probably address that a little bit more. There are IES standards, safety standards, when even a property isn't operable for protection. You don't want vagrancy. You don't want somebody to pull in, because we will have cameras, not going over to the neighboring properties, but so we can monitor the site from those kinds of issues. Nobody, including the neighbors, want vagrants to go there at night and make it their home. So there will be low levels, but a lot of the lighting, like the vacuum stall lighting, a lot of that, we can probably get to start dimming down and the elements around the building, but I think we'd all want, including the neighbors, to have some lighting on this property, even after hours.
And there is the section 3-1302 site lighting requirements, which require that the lighting not exceed from the property line and cast more than a diffuse shadow onto abutting properties. So just like a noise ordinance, there is a separate lighting ordinance that
I
will be
couldn't tell
complied
from
with.
your photometric drawing because it didn't go to the property line, so
Yeah.
it stopped, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we took, before even going this point with the board, being my background, we always try to mitigate impact on any redevelopment. This site had ability to add more vacuum stalls, expand it a little bit, expand on the curb cuts, but we went into it specifically to reduce any impact and keep it within its current use, but reducing the current use's impact on the neighbors. And as Brian mentioned, noise. We're not going with those old school individualized vacuum units that are much louder and operate independently. We're going with a central vacuum system, which the mechanical will be enclosed. The decibels are significantly less. Now, there's aspects of them that become more costly, but from a long-term perspective, we think that's better for the community and us as a property owner. The mechanical equipment, I think somebody mentioned, it's all going to be contained. The length of the building, from a noise coming out of the automatic bay, the tunnel is getting larger to contain all that equipment within it and have the air dryers within it. And it's basically closed on all corners but the front and back. Even assuming there were windows on the westerly wall, we always install impact windows by code, and they almost provide the same decibel ratings as having a block wall. So, we don't want the property to be loud from our own perspective. If somebody's in their parking stall vacuuming their car, we don't want their ears to be drumming and they can't hear themselves think because the equipment that's within the property line. So, we took a lot of those considerations into effect from the onset. We're happy to answer, or I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have for me.
Since you're the owner, I have a question in reference to, because you're considering being able to put up a 6-foot fence, PVC fence. Right now, there's no existing fence on the property. So who maintains the easement after that?
It's the city's easement.
It is the city's easement, and they're obligated to maintain easement to a certain extent. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a requirement that the fence be closed off at the front of the easement or whatnot. But we generally, when our landscapers go out there, they'll clean up and make sure that there's not overgrowth and issues. There is the neighbor's fence that's currently there right now, chain link fence as well, that's within their property line. But, we've wanted to redevelop the site for quite some time. Technology really wasn't there to fit it within its current use without potentially going forward to cover up the retention pond. You can't move the building perpendicular or parallel to the roadway because of engineering concerns. Technology's been there. One thing we don't like is dilapidated properties or older properties. We maintain our properties really well, to the point where people are even surprised that we put that type of improvements into our buildings. So, we finally got to a position where we think we can improve this with the car wash equipment that currently exists today. And we're excited to improve it, as opposed to, potentially having to sell it and do something else with it.
Anything else?
Thank you all very much.
All right, well,
Thank you.
we'll move on to presentation by persons with party status. I think the representative for Raintree Village might go first.
Good afternoon again, board members. As I mentioned before, my name is Scott Gross. I represent the Raintree Village condominium, the condominium entity. I did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Owings before we got here today, briefly, and mentioned the concerns of the community to him. And I want to mention those same concerns to you guys, so that you are aware of where the community is coming from. I think we recognize where we're at in the process. We're here at sort of the final stage of the process, and that's where we got involved. We have not been involved along the way, and so we didn't have an opportunity to participate in some of the earlier hearings and comments and all of that stuff. The thing that I noted, though, as I was going through the comments, the staff comments, was that initially the staff had recommended, and I think it's been spoken to a couple of times now, but the staff had recommended a more substantial wall. And the concerns of the community, just so you guys, and we're all on the same page here, the concerns of the community are the noise, which has been brought up several times, the fumes from the cars, because of the way that it's being redesigned. The cars are now going to line up right against the backyards of the residents. And then the hours of operation, which have been addressed as well. So the hours of operation thing, we recognize that that's not something that you guys are really in charge of, but they've addressed the concerns in that regard for the most part anyway, so that's really not at issue anymore. The noise and the fumes are really where we're focused, and the mitigation efforts in that regard is where we want to focus the committee or the board's attention. I think there are certain things that we can do, more substantial wall being one of them, sort of going along with the original comments. We recognize that may be more difficult to achieve, given the easement, given the redesign of the property and everything else. But again, the new structure is being built now, not 20 feet away from the property line like it is currently, but 100 feet away from the property line. So we got a lot of room to work with now. So we can take that wall, get it away from the easement and the trees and everything else that's of concern, and just run the wall straight to the back of the property and get something more substantial in the way between the cars, the fumes, the noise, everything else. And I think that's a better solution than just putting a PVC fence, which probably isn't going to do a whole lot for the noise at all. Similarly, I'm not sure if it's going to do anything for the fumes, but I think a more substantial structure there may help the situation. I think one of the other things I was going to mention, the 4 feet is what's currently in the comments. The applicant has agreed, it sounds like, to 6 feet. A more substantial structure, similarly, we would want it like 6 feet, so that we're all sort of on the same page in that regard as well. But I think at a minimum, a 6 feet barrier of some kind is sort of the baseline of where we should be at. I'm gonna stop there and ask if there's any questions for me at this point. I mean, I think our position is pretty straightforward. Again, I don't know that we're trying to stand in the way of this development project moving forward, We just want some common sense mitigation to help us with these fumes and the noise.
So I guess I'm not really clear on what the request is. Is it a 6-foot fence?
The request is a more substantial fence. Or a more substantial wall, really. The original comments, before we got to where we are today, the original comments from the staff was to put a wall, a concrete barrier, pier and concrete lintel wall. I think our request would be the same thing. Put that same type of barrier system there that will prevent a little bit more of the noise, will prevent a little bit more of the fumes from getting across. Just a more substantial barrier that'll prevent a lot of those concerns.
Along the west side of the...
Along the west side, correct.
Is this wall supposed to be along the property line, or is it supposed to be along the line of the driveway?
So I think it's gonna have to be more towards the driveway because of the easement and the tree root concerns. We're gonna have to scoot it over, and that was the comment I made earlier. We've shifted everything over anyway. The new structure is being moved to the opposite side, to the Walgreens side. The vacuum systems are all sort of now in the middle. We've got some room to work with there. I think there's enough room that we could probably figure out a way to put a wall down that pathway.
I have a question that might be for counsel. If I understand Mr. Onst's position, he doesn't feel in a position to engineer an alternative like a concrete wall here on the fly, and that he's, at this point, the project having been developed with the PVC, he's willing to commit to a minimum 6-foot fence instead of minimum 4-foot, but the idea of identifying the location and the design for a concrete wall is something he's not prepared to do here. And my question is, what would be the ability of this board to make a recommendation of approval without having that resolved?
At the risk of mischaracterizing Mr. Ung's statements, I believe Mr. Ung's statement in the record was that he was approached by the representative of Range, Mr. Gross, who speaks here now, in roughly the last 90 minutes, and he would consider, his client, I should say, would consider placing a wall along not in addition to, but either along the easement line that has been contemplated in the specs that you have before you, or even alternatively along Raintree's property line. Were they amenable to it? Could that, assuming the parties are amenable to it, then the city would be amenable to it. But as you stated, he's unable in the here and now to provide you with specs. From a procedural standpoint, which is what I'm here to advise you on, my advice to you would be that you have stated conditions, namely 4 and 5, that speak to this, and that if you were to make a motion that would add a condition, it seems that an appropriate motion could be to impose that motion, comma, or that condition, namely I believe 4, comma, or such other arrangement as the parties may be amenable to, provided that it complies with all required specifications imposed by the city. That muddies the waters. I understand that, but I'm answering the question you've posed. I would defer to city staff, and I'm not looking at the condition right now. I'm fumbling through, so I'm going on the fly in what I've seen in your lines there. But I would say this, or something that all parties would be amenable to, that at the very least satisfies the predicate alternative.
I thought that, I don't remember if it was Brian or the planning, that a wall was questioned during the permitting process, and the engineering department, I guess the arborist, said that would not be acceptable because of the tree roots.
Correct. The testimony, there's also testimony in the record concerning the tree roots, which is why the phrasing that I had offered was conditional on it otherwise satisfying engineering, arboreal. But then again, you're dealing with a series of conditionals that would have to be satisfied. It doesn't leave any commitment that it would be a wall. That would be conditional language that could be framed, but you are correct, Mr. Caudell.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
I've conferred with my client. If we aren't able to reach a resolution on what we want to do with the fence date, the city would prefer a continuance of this item to try and work it out. So just wanted to make that clear from our perspective.
And just so we're
I
all
would
clear.
suggest,
I would suggest before we get out, we're getting them to make their opening statements. Let's hear the rest of the people that have to stay, and the other parties are hearing it. Let them come up with their rebuttal, and they may be working this out without us even inputting anything by the time they get back up here.
Yeah, and I concur with that, by the way. I did not say that during my time, but I just want to let you guys know that that would have been our request as well. If we can't get it figured out here today, let's do this again in 30 days or whenever we meet again, and we can, in the meantime, try to figure out a method for resolution, whether it's getting another study done or something else to try to figure out.
I'm just uncomfortable leaving such an open-ended thing.
Yeah.
That being said, though, if you were amenable to the 6-foot fence that's proposed now, I think the city would be okay with that, right? So we'll leave it in your hands.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the next person who requested party status was Joan Bigler, a Raintree resident.
Let's see. Well, this isn't showing very big, but what I wanted to point out is this area right here. My condo is right on the other side here. So this is the traffic area of the incoming car wash. Okay, so that butts up right next to me. Let's see. Oh, this is better, yeah. Okay, so here are Raintree condos right here. I'm the X right there, okay? In back of me is a retention pond, right here. This is the existing car wash. Now that road, driveway that they're trying to put in is right along the tree line there. So they said they'll have to take down a couple trees, and there's not much of a buffer there. So what I'm gonna see is, hopefully, if I know this goes through, I'm not happy about it, but I'd rather see a 6-foot brick wall, something to buffer the noise. Let me address what I did last week. I had to call the police again because of the loud noise at the car wash. They play very loud music. They, have that boom, boom, boom. It rattles the windows in my condo. That's how loud it is. So, and the fumes, right now, I'm not bothered by the fumes because I don't have that driveway right next to me. But I am bothered by the noise. And I don't know how many times in the past we've had to call the police, non-emergency number, and have them go over there and settle the matter. Because cars collect over there, groups of people collect over there, and they play music. So this has happened numerous times. I've lived there 19 years, and this is a big change. I am also a real estate agent with Charles Rutenberg Realty, and have been for about over 30 years. And I believe this is going to affect my property value, because this is going to lower it with this big car wash next door, and also the way the cars come in right along the back of my yard. So they'll be driving in there, possibly playing loud music, sitting, waiting for their turn to go to the car wash, and I'm just going to hear all this noise. And the fumes. Now I have to address the fumes. So I'm just not happy with the way the cars are coming in and having to sit there. What's going to stop somebody from coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning to wash their car? It's an automated service, correct? So what's going to stop somebody from coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Apparently, their hours of operation is daylight.
Well, is someone going to be there to turn off all the lights, or, what's going to happen? I don't know. I don't know of very many car washes that turn off at dark.
I'm sure the applicant can address that with you.
So just the way the cars are coming in, and they're right next to the condos, the fumes, the lines, the noise, I have a problem with it. and also the property values. And what about the lighting? You know, are there gonna be lots of lights or shining, or, you know, I don't know about that either. So I'm concerned about that. Right now you can see, this is a condo, right here, this white spot here, that's a condo. And this dark area right here is the second story of their condo. That's how close we are to the car wash. And the line of trees is helping to buffer that, but and also the elevation. Raintree Village is very low compared to the car wash. The car wash is elevated, and we are very low. So where's that excess water gonna go? Now, I know they do have plans. There is a current retention pond that runs from Walgreens all the way to Raintree Village property line. And I'd like to make sure that that stays. So,
Could you put that picture back up?
sure.
This may be a question for the applicant, but as best I can tell, where that curb is on that tree line, is that essentially where the drive aisle is going to be?
It's not changing, the driveways, there's a driveway there now.
I want to pass the podium.
Sorry, there's a driveway path there now, as you all can clearly see. That's how customers get from the front of the property to the back. They don't pull back out, go through Walgreens, and then come to the back. The curb cuts are substantially all staying the same as we've stated, and as Ella stated at her opening. The cars are just being fed through that way for traffic flow purposes, safety purposes, to ensure not backflow through Sunset Point Road or through Walgreens property. So that's why we're feeding them through that way now, which is where they currently drive through right now anyway. So that's why we were a little bit confused about the comments about the driveway, because not only is there a driveway, but there's bays and vacuums where people just could sit on all day. But yes, there is currently a driveway. The curb cuts are not changing. We're trying to not have to change them for a lot of reasons, because then we just get out of hand with everything.
Well, that driveway doesn't go all the way back to what he's talking about. And what they're currently trying to do is go ahead and extend it all along there longer and then turn it. And all the fumes, the cars standing in line, music playing, you know, that's going to be a problem. So you can check with the police, how many times they've been called. Like I said, I just called them last week, and they came out. And I hate to keep bothering the police about a matter like this, because they should be doing other things and not controlling noise. But I have no choice. When my windows start to rattle, I'm concerned. You know, it's upsetting. So, and as a real estate person, I can see where this is going to devalue, especially having that long line driving right by there.
Is this typically a nighttime thing, the noise?
What?
The noise, is this typically?
No, it's during the day. It's all the time. Yeah. This happened to me when I called the police. It was during the day. Yeah. And it's just a lot of people get together there and they congregate and they play loud music, and you know, so this has been happening for 19 years. And I've called the owner a couple times because I know him, because I got a hold of his number, and I called him and I said, you know, this has got to stop. And then I started calling the police. So we had no choice at that point because they weren't going to do anything about it. Is somebody going to be there at the car wash, you know, all the time? I mean, you know, taking care of the noise problem? You know, these are all questions I don't have an answer to. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next person with party status is Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, board members. The Coalition of Neighborhoods would ask the board to follow the objective of follow the code, follow the process, have a process and a code that is transparent and understandable to the public without having side agreements that are not visibly apparent to the public. In this application fails one of the 6 required Section 3.914 general applicability criteria. That, combined with the requirement of Section 4-26D4, states, quote, "The burden of proof is upon the applicant to show by substantial competent evidence that he is entitled to the approval requested." And going back to 3.914, 6 requires, quote, "The design of the proposed development minimizes adverse effects, including visual, acoustic, olfactory, and hours of operation impacts on adjacent properties." We're talking about adjacent properties here. The applicant's response to this requirement is, quote, "The proposed redevelopment is designed with increased setbacks, increased landscaping, and more efficient site plan and more efficient traffic flow. As such, the project is designed to minimize adverse effects, including visual, acoustic, and olfactory, and hours of operation impacts on the adjacent properties." So they're just saying, well, we do it. But I could find nothing in the application record dealing with the hours of operation. You got some information today on that. Didn't see much in there on the acoustic aspects of the project on the adjoining properties. If you didn't see it, and that's a requirement that it be provided in the application, doesn't it fail the code's burden of proof requirement? I got my vehicle washed yesterday in the existing car wash. They do a good job with the washing the cars. I observed a sign saying, "Please, please, please lower volume on your radio, courtesy for the neighbors," underscoring the current requirement to prohibit limited vehicle service, which includes car washes, adjoining residential neighborhoods. I've been to a lot of car washes. People hang out there, they have the radio going while they're drying off their car or putting polish on or putting the tire black on. That's why the current requirement is in the code that it can't adjoin residential neighborhoods. And it says the parcel proposed for development is not contiguous to a parcel of land which is designated as residential. In other words, limited service, vehicle service is only allowed when it's not contiguous to a parcel of land which is designated residential. So it is appropriate not to extend this non-conforming use. It's non-conforming because this apparently was added to the code in the last, that wasn't in there in the last version. So then you look at the code and look at the provision within the code that says a non-conforming use cannot be extended, cannot be expanded. Instead, this board should encourage replacement of this outdated facility with a different commercial use that is more compatible with the adjoining residential uses. And I have some pictures of the sign here for you to share with you.
By virtue of its presentation, it is already in the record, but I will also provide it and circulate it as it was.
All right, cross-examination of witnesses by planning staff? Cross-examination of witnesses by applicant?
I do have just a few, Madam Chair, and I don't know if this would be better for Ms. Crandall or Director Clayton, but we did, I want to address this suggestion regarding the comments from the DRC hearing. So when we apply for a comprehensive infill flexible development application level 2, we do our initial submittal, and we either get a completeness letter or we get a letter of incompleteness. If there's a letter of incompleteness, we have to submit something or fix something in the original submittal to move on to the DRC. If we get a letter of completeness, like we did in this case, we move on to the Development Review Committee, which is a public meeting, but generally members of the public don't attend it, they can't speak at it. But the staff and the applicant discuss the DRC comments. And the comments come from all of the disciplines of the staff: engineering, sanitation, parks and rec, planning. There was a planning comment regarding a wall. And then there was an engineering comment saying, get the wall or the fence or showing out of the easement. So I wanted to see if we had a meeting, a follow-up meeting with Ms. Clayton, Director Clayton, and Ms. Crandall about that issue and those two comments. And I was hoping that they might elaborate a little more on how they arrived at the 6-foot-tall PVC fence as the condition of approval that they're recommending today.
I'll try and address that. So, since we are discussing a lot about the Development Review Committee comments, one thing I want to say, when an application comes through our Development Review Committee, we have all of the technical members, planning, engineering, and so on. Planning staff and staff in general, we comment and we try and get applicants to the most supportable, the most approvable project we can. What is the most consistent project we can get out of here? So we have lots of comments at DRC. And this is usually what I tell applicants when they see the number of comments they have. We're trying to get you to the best possible project. So that explains, we knew commercial next to residential, buffering is going to be very important, which is why we had that comment. This is a challenge with that utility easement. What can we actually accomplish there? So at DRC, we had those comments. There was a lot of discussion during the meeting with technical staff and the applicant. What can we do? How can we accomplish this? We need something here. Not everything gets resolved at DRC. We had follow-up conversations. And that is where really, the condition of approval that staff recommends to you was for a PVC fence because it seemed the most realistic to fit between an easement and a drive aisle and tree roots. And so I'm happy to talk about this as I'm an ISA certified arborist. I've done several years of doing inspections on construction sites. So this was largely kind of encouraged to, keeping those existing trees, I think is very important for buffering. I try and be very realistic about what you can actually construct next to existing oak trees. Anyone who's worked with me usually knows I'm pretty adamant about tree roots. And if you want the tree, you got to keep the tree roots. So that was a lot of the discussion. Why PVC? Why not a masonry wall? There is a construction technique called pier and lintel, where, if you're building a masonry wall, you have this continuous footer. To me, that's continuous root damage. The construction technique of pier and lintel, you have piers, so you have intermittent pilings, and then you span them. That is very helpful for construction around tree roots. So that's also the challenge here, is we're getting really detailed, construction techniques for a condition. It's an option that was, an original comment, get the most substantial buffering that we can on this western property line. It's clearly very important. But I don't know if that helps explain, the DRC comments, what was said, why it was said, what we're trying to accomplish. What we're trying to accomplish that really, truly can be constructed when you get to building permit. And that's kind of the challenge with this one is the most substantial wall is going to impact those trees.
Thank you, Ms. Crandall. Yeah, I think that's good. And this is my time for questions, but I wanted to let you know that our civil engineer, Mr. Palmer, has a proposal regarding what that most substantial wall that won't impact the tree roots, that also won't impact the retention pond, because keep in mind the retention pond is also in the rear of the property. So if we were to put a brick wall, then you're impacting the retention pond and you're impacting the drive aisles and the curb cuts because you have to put footers. But he's got a suggestion for a panel wall So I don't know if you want to ask him about that, but Mr., if you'd like to just explain what your alternative to a PVC fence would be that we would be agreeable to?
Yeah, it's similar to what, might even be the same thing that Ella was talking about. It's a concrete panel wall. You got piers, 24-inch diameter. The panels can be up to 20 feet long, so you could strategically place the piers to do the least amount of damage to the roots, if that would be acceptable to the city. It's a more substantial wall, lightweight.
Is that a precast wall or is it?
Yeah, it's a precast, and it just slips in between the two columns. So,
Similar what DOT uses.
yes, exactly.
They're sound attenuating panels?
Yeah, yeah.
Sound deflecting.
Thank you.
Before you leave, are you telling me that the applicant would be agreeable to consider doing that in lieu of the PVC wall? Just need a yes.
Yes, we are, but and it was mentioned by Mr. Palmer, subject to approval by the city, because we do want to make sure the 24-inch diameter panels, so, assuming engineering from the city and everyone can be on board with it, and we can get it to fit, we are okay with doing that. So kind of the minimum requirement is put up the panel wall, which achieves a substantial wall, because we've installed those before. But again, it's, as Ms. Crandall mentioned, you get into very detailed drawing permitting requirements. But we are okay with that, and we were okay with it from the onset, by the way. And again, just to address the comments about the other wall, the if-or scenario, my experience with council members and councils in the cities is they don't get too intricately involved with neighboring properties negotiating deals, regardless of whether this goes on beyond today, because there's rights of access agreements that need to be signed for it to be done, potential easements. So typically, as Ms. Crandall mentioned, is you try to get the most conforming use of this property, with the understanding that we always will work in good faith with our neighbors.
And I did just speak with Ms. Crandall, and the city would be amenable to doing a 6-foot pier and lintel masonry wall if the applicant considers that. So just something for you to consider.
On the east side of the easement? Which is the
Correct. So
property side?
what we discussed is, so you have the proposed condition of approval number 4. It's a little wordy because we're getting a lot of details in, but the change would be kind of saying, providing a minimum 6-foot high pier and lintel masonry wall outside the easement and without impacting the existing tree roots, the same language that's there. So that's kind of, again, the pier and lintel really helps minimize the impacts to the tree roots. It's going to be that balancing of getting it outside the easement,
And this would be immediately adjacent to the driveway.
Correct. So that would be a minor change to condition number 4, but keeping all the other details.
And this may be an ignorant question, so I apologize, but as a relatively new voting member, I want to make sure I understand my or our role in terms of voting on this, what we're actually approving, and how far are we getting into the weeds of the means and methods of the type of construction. And that's I'm not leading. I honestly don't know what we're actually approving today, and how many nuances are we adding or not adding.
We did have in the original staff report that we wanted a PVC wall, so we're really just substituting this in for a different type of wall. And we were already, the staff report also recommended a 4-foot wall, in which case we recommended 6 feet. Still recommending 6 feet. We're just changing the report to change the type of fence, which would be perfectly okay from the city's perspective.
And to speak more narrowly to your question, your code the city's code is different from some other codes where it is strictly, this is the rule and the variance. Your code allows for some flexibility subject to conditions where the parties can sort of, for lack of a better term, negotiate to a result that is more amenable without a series of a variance for 2 feet this way, 1 foot this way, 3 more plants, 2 more feet on this. And so what you have is a more flexible arrangement subject to the conditions, so long as they reasonably relate to the nature of the development done in form of, what's the term I'm looking for, proportionality and otherwise. And so the 13 conditions, I believe it was 13, that were proposed, what you've had is as the city council has stated, a change in the nature of the material. That is still consistent. If you started getting into features such as, and it shall be the color blue, and a red heart in the middle, then you're going well above and beyond your actual charge here today. But getting to a design specification that harmonizes arboreal concerns, stormwater mitigation concerns, and otherwise, that's still consistent with a design specification. Does that?
It does. I guess my question is, I understand the applicant's position. I also understand the city's position, primarily in terms of maintaining and prioritizing the trees. I guess I'm trying to understand the value to the neighbors' complaints as it relates to noise and fumes. What a 6-foot PVC wall versus a 6-foot wall that has a brick, a fake brick facade. It's not lining up, so I just want to make sure I understand what I'm voting on.
So because this is a quasi-judicial hearing, what you're considering is, as was stated earlier by one of the parties, competent substantial evidence, and ultimately what you have is competing testimony and competing evidence on what is and is not. And some things are not evidence, some things are simply opinion. However, you have competing testimony on issues, and that is the charge of this body today, to resolve those. It may very well be that and this is not, I want to be very clear, not what the record testimony is, but if somebody comes in and says, this fence does nothing, and somebody else comes in and says, this fence does everything, ultimately, you have to take the evidence before you and reach that conclusion, and you're not bound by what the city stated, you're not bound by what the applicant or their opposition may state. Ultimately, you are the jurist here. And so you are correct to say that you've heard competing opinions on relevant points pertaining to this development and the attributable conditions, and ultimately it is for this body to decide what it believes is founded within the competent substantial evidence and the essential requirements of law that you have heard today.
Can we add to the specification sound attenuating or not?
That is a very ambiguous, can we add to it? If you had something far more substantial, I could perhaps opine, but something's...
Well, I guess maybe can we tie it into any code for the city that for sound, noise abatement, whatever?
I would advise against creating an arbitrary condition because the city's code does apply. As you've heard from the applicant and the city, they are still bound by lighting restrictions, sound restrictions, hours of trash, all the things that bind any property within that commercial district still apply. So you don't need to double down and say, but they still have to comply with the noise ordinance. The other advice I would give you as it relates to code complaints and code things is you're considering, well, we've heard complaints. A complaint is not an adjudication of a violation, and so that is something else to consider when we consider due process and the otherwise. The testimony you've heard is there's no pending violations on the property, and that's also within the application materials. That's not to say there aren't environmental concerns that need to be addressed. I'm just, again, trying to advise you to a more complete result and solution.
So my question is, if we go to the extent of doing this precast wall, it makes no difference in sound attenuation, or it doesn't satisfy their expectation of sound attenuation. There is no recourse for them to make it, to add more to this.
I'm going to unpack that. There were a lot of pronouns without antecedents. The them here being the adjacent property owners.
Yes.
If the them is the adjacent property owners, once the general testimony today has been that the preference would be a more substantial wall. I'm using a term used, that is not mine. A more substantial wall is the preference to mitigate that effect. If a more substantial wall, whether that be in the form of a pier and lintel, precast, however you're describing it, is aimed at that and it fails to meet their expectations, them being the adjacent property owners, their recourse is to go under the code and make complaints, as you've heard, and say, this environmentally, this was what we wanted. It didn't get us all the way there. I'm still getting impermissible decibel levels as within your code, and you have that recourse, but you don't have the recourse to come at a later date and say, no, they've got to demolish that, and now they need to exist within a biodome that insulates all sound, and we still exist within a ordered society with environmental hazards.
All right, that answers my question. One thing I wanted to address is the engineer, Mr. Palmer. The stormwater requirements, because there was a question about that.
Is the impervious surface area exactly the same as it was before?
It actually is a reduction.
A reduction?
Yeah.
Okay.
And no change to the drainage system or pond.
Okay. All right, so that let's see, so that would be a city of Clearwater issue as far as stormwater control. And the attenuation is through swift mud, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
We'll be applying for an exemption.
Okay, great.
Madam Chair, procedurally, we were in cross-examination of the
By the-
parties if there's additional cross-examination
I was going to
necessary.
ask Mr. Ongst if there's any further cross-examination by the applicant?
Mr. Hunt's question's been posed to you. Is there any additional
Any further
cross-examination?
cross-examination by the applicant?
I think Mr. Palmer could maybe address that question that was just asked about whether a precast wall is more noise attenuating than a plastic wall, but that would be it.
Yeah, I think the substitution of a precast concrete wall, 6 foot high, would most likely reduce sound more than a plastic PVC.
All right, cross-examination of witnesses by persons with party status. Mr. Gross? All right. Ms. Begeler? She come forward.
Like I said, I've been there 19 years, okay, been there a long time. Saw some changes to the car wash. This area right here, this is the end of this was originally the end of the car wash.
This is the cross-examination period.
Yeah, do you have questions for the other?
Do you have a question for the city staff or another party
Yes.
who's made a presentation?
Oh, okay, yes. They're saying that this roadway right here, I wonder if it was permitted, because originally, that's the question I had, is it permitted? Because I've been there a long time, and I know there was a lot of work done after 5 o'clock in the evening. So this would be the road right here. Is that area, when they made that area, did they have a permit? Because originally it was going to be a bay, and they stopped putting the bay in there. So my question is that permitted? Is that roadway permitted?
I appreciate you directing it to me, only because I was about to speak. I would say whether or not the applicant desires to answer that question is their prerogative, but I would submit to the board that the permitting history of the property is not at issue for purposes of the application that you're considering.
Okay, and that's where the road would be.
Well,
But I guess it doesn't
under
matter.
the proposal, you would see that everything that is going before this body today is being permitted. To the extent your inquiry was about what happened 20 years ago,
No,
or even
no.
15 years ago, I
10.
can't speak to that, ma'am, and I'm not attempting to. I'm advising my client, the body, that the permitting history of the property is not at issue for purposes of the consideration, and that the application they're considering, by the very virtue of this process, would be permitting it going forward.
Ma'am,
Were
this
they-
does have a records request process that you can go through, so if you'd like, I can give you my card, and you can contact me, and I can kind of guide you through what you need to do to put in a records request. We could address your questions that way.
Okay, all right.
We're happy to answer it.
From the board's perspective and from my neighbor's perspective, even though it wasn't directed towards me, to the best of our knowledge, we submitted a site plan, architectural plan. It was permitted, approved. We constructed it. It was inspected. We received a CO. The layout of the building itself has not changed at all for 22 years. It's been built that way. It had a driveway path because that's how you get to the back of the property within our property line. And I don't think it would have been permitted without accessibility and from emergency in and out, traffic flow purposes. So, and the records do exist.
Anything further for any of the presenters, Ms. Begeler? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, board, and I apologize for taking time from your afternoon. First question is, I don't remember his name, but the civil engineer that testified that the application is consistent with a comprehensive infill redevelopment provisions of the code. with that.
Could you come forward, please, to the podium?
You need to speak towards the microphone.
Am I not speaking?
Once you pivoted to address the audience.
Yeah, just keep reminding me.
They're just gathering their materials, sir.
You'll have to come forward to the podium to respond.
A question has not yet been posed, but they were trying to identify the speaker for the question.
Section 2-704F is the requirements of the comprehensive infill redevelopment project. And the first element is the development or redevelopment is otherwise impractical without deviations from the use or the development standards set forth in this zoning district. So what other redevelopment alternatives did you consider that would be consistent with this zoning district?
We were not looking at other redevelopments, we were looking at,
I'm sorry, can you come up a little more?
we were only looking at redeveloping the existing car wash.
So you did not consider other redevelopment opportunities?
No, we did not.
Okay, I would think that that's a significant fact for the board to consider. The second one is, another provision is the proposed use shall be compatible with adjacent land uses. And considering that the existing code prohibits limited service vehicle service, how can you say that the proposed use is compatible with adjacent land uses?
It's been compatible for the last 20 years. We're making the property, we're upgrading the property, we're reducing the impacts. I think we've proven that. So the property, it's a 20-year-old property that's functioned as a car wash, right? It appears that it is compatible.
I'm having trouble understanding how you can say it's compatible when you've heard testimony today of problems with the compatibility with the residential, and that it isn't consistent with the existing code today.
Well, the staff reviewed the code.
I'm asking you, sir, whether...
In my opinion,
Yes.
Well, let me answer your question. Go ahead.
in my opinion, it's been there for 20 years. It appears to be a compatible use.
All right, to the board, let me just comment that
You'll have a
that...
chance to make a closing.
It's cross-examination. You will have a final opportunity to present.
Okay,
This is just
I have
cross-examination.
another comment, another question for you, sir. In 6, it says, in order to form a cohesive, visually interesting, and attractive appearance. Can you talk about the cohesive, visually interesting, and attractive appearance? That would be fine. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, rotate that.
Sorry. I don't know why that works that way.
So can you repeat the question?
In order to form a cohesive, visually interesting, and attractive appearance, can you describe that, especially with that jumble of stuff on the roof, as being cohesive?
Well, I'd say that's somewhat subjective. Just call it like a jumbled mess or whatever. But no, so we designed a building that architecturally is proportionate, and we feel like the forms are well designed. It's modern, up to date. We're using modern contemporary materials that will just increase the value of the property. And I don't know if I'm not a public speaker, but.
All right, let me ask you another question. The existing building without that added rooftop structure, what is the height of that existing building?
I do not have that with me currently.
Isn't it true that the code would allow 25 feet without having a flexibility of that height?
I can't speak to the height of the existing elevations of the building, but on the new structure, I believe the primary roof structure, there's a large one here. The primary roof structure of the building is 16 feet tall, which is below the allowable amount. And I believe the code allows for future elements that are taller, and that's what we're proposing right here.
Well, I believe you are correct that it allows additional if you justify it as part of the comprehensive infill or part of the flexibility level. So, okay. Thank you. The next question I have is regard to the traffic study. Is Mr. Gates here?
He's not here today. His evidence is in the record.
Well, how can I cross-examine that evidence?
You could have your own traffic expert.
I'm sorry?
Sir, if you could direct your comments.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Direct
okay.
your comments
Thank
to
you.
the body. This is not a repartee between the various parties. It's cross-examination.
I would like to call Mr. Michael Gates to testify to the traffic.
Let the record
counts.
reflect Mr. Gates is not present.
Okay, then let the record reflect that I'm not able to question and validate the traffic counts.
Understood, sir.
That's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, there's an opportunity for members of the public who did not request party status but want to make comments or otherwise speak to the board to come forward. Is there anyone who would like to present any information or questions to the board?
As you come forward, sir, if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, my name is Robert Bigler. I also live at Raintree Village. And my questions with regard to some of the testimony that came out where they talked about, and I wasn't clear, was it no late operations or probably no late operations of the car wash? And what is late? And does that mean that no one can come in and use the vacuums after a certain hour? Because I'm one of the ones that has his windows rattling in the middle of the night, and I'm getting tired of it.
I believe the testimony has been that daylight hours would be the hours of operation.
Well, I thought I heard probably, and I worry about probably.
All right, sir, this is your opportunity for comment. You can make any comments if the applicant or anybody else chooses to address those in their closing remarks. That's their prerogative.
Okay. If they are saying that no one can come in and run the vacuums in the middle of the night, because that's really when the problem comes in with the noise. It isn't the running of the car wash, it's the running of the vacuums outside of the building where they sit there with the car doors open and the radio blasting and the bass turned all the way up, and there's nothing that can be done about it. If you call the police, they say, well, that's their prerogative. And it's frustrating.
Thank you, Mr. Begler.
Thank you.
Any other member of the public that would like to make a comment or provide information to the board? All right. We'll be going for closing remarks by the planning staff.
I have no closing remarks.
Closing remarks by the persons with party status. Ms. Bigler, anything further?
Yeah.
And ma'am, for your benefit, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah. Hi, y'all. Okay, I just got this. We just got this paperwork today, so like, oh, sure. Joan Bidler. Okay. I just got this paperwork before this meeting started, so I hadn't had a chance to look at it, but now I'm observing there's 2
Excuse
lanes.
me, if I can ask a question of counsel. At this point in the process, is it appropriate for additional evidence to be presented?
Ordinarily, closing remarks are a summation of the testimony offered. We are not so strictly limited to the rules of evidence here ordinarily, however, and at the discretion of the chair, this should be a summation of evidence already presented. Because at this point, the evidence presented is not cross-examined, etc.
Right.
We've seen the site plan. We've seen the site plan.
Yeah. All right, if you want to make comments as part of your summation regarding the site plan.
Yes. Coming in the driveway here, I noticed that there's 2 rows of cars coming in, not 1. I was under the assumption from the other pictures that there was just 1 row of cars coming in, but you can see they have 2 rows of cars coming in, standing, waiting. So that's a concern to me that it's not just 1 row, it's 2. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Johnson, final comments?
Thank you. As I said in my opening, Bill Johnson, speaking for the Clearwater Neighborhoods Coalition. As I said in my introductory remark, our intent is to see that the code is followed, it's transparent, it's understandable, and there's no secret agreements or provisions provided. We have heard today that this is an application for comprehensive infill redevelopment. During that, the response to one of my questions, they did not consider any other redevelopment option for that site. I believe that that is a failure to follow provision F1 under the comprehensive redevelopment projects. They did not follow subsection 5, which requires that the proposal be comparable or compatible, with adjacent land uses. We know it's not compatible because the code itself says limited vehicle service shall not be located next to a residential. We've heard testimony from the neighbors that the noises and the problems from the existing car wash, yet we see a huge development which has more parking spaces, more opportunities for radios to be left on, for activity in the parking lot. We've also heard that they have not been able to substantiate the fact that the traffic is going to be less. Now, just as was mentioned by the last speaker, you now have 2 lanes of cars queuing up to go through that tunnel. If you have that many if you're going to allow that many cars to back up, that's got to move through fairly quickly. And I'm sure you have seen that in other locations where you've gotten your car washed. I have not been able to validate that number, so I have to think that that number is undependable. The final thing, the code changed since it was originally adopted. That means that it's non-conforming. The non-conforming provisions of this code were specifically intended to bring ultimate compliance with the code as redevelopment occurred. If you're not following that process, you're not following the code. The code is intended to allow the nonconformities to be phased out when redevelopment occurs. You should not approve this and should decline to allow the reestablishment of a car wash at this location.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Closing remarks by the applicant.
Before I start my time, I think we had 1 minute and 50 seconds remaining that we reserved for rebuttal from the first presentation. So essentially, I reserved the balance of my 10 minutes, was about 1 minute 50. Mr. Jolly would like to address some things, and there were a lot of other things mentioned that I'd like to address as well.
Before you proceed, sir, did you say you had an amount of time that you had written down?
I have 1 minute 16.
That's fine. We can work with that.
Four minutes, 16 seconds. I can assist by setting a timer.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair. Brian Ungst again, in rebuttal and summation. First, I want to address Mr. Johnson's point about not considering other uses. That's not a criteria. The criteria he's referencing is the development or redevelopment is otherwise impractical without deviations from the use and or development standards set forth in the zoning district. It doesn't require you to consider other uses. It requires you to establish that a deviation from those criteria is required. And as he's pointed out, the deviation is that it's adjacent to a residential zoning, just like it's adjacent to a Walgreens, just like it's adjacent to a self-storage. And our response to that is it's operated there for 22 years, and what we're proposing as the staff, your expert witness staff, have repeatedly said in the staff report, is a substantial improvement and a significant reduction on the use. It's a substantial improvement in landscaping, it's a substantial improvement in buffering, it's a substantial improvement in lowering the ISR, lowering the FAR. It's a substantial improvement in terms of where this use is located and how it interacts with its neighboring properties. What Mr. Johnson is proposing is to leave this use there forever, not to improve it. Your code isn't designed to not allow someone to improve their property. That's precisely why we have the comprehensive infill prospect. The other thing I have to remind you of is this is a quasi-judicial hearing, and you have to only consider competent substantial evidence. Competent substantial evidence is not lay witness opinion testimony about noise pollution, about traffic. That is lay witness testimony, does not meet the burden of competent substantial evidence. You have had no expert witness testimony against this application today. All of the city staff's experts, the engineering department, they reviewed Mr. Yates's work. They reviewed his traffic counts. If they thought they were incorrect, they would have told us. If they needed a traffic study, they would have told us. This is a reduction, a substantial reduction in traffic, not to mention a substantial reduction from the 24 hours of service and the vacuums that are right up against the property line to daylight hours of service, which is not a probably, it's a will be, and significantly reduced and set back from the property line. And again, all the noise mitigation we've discussed. I'm going to let Mr. Jallo close out our argument and the summation of the evidence and provide you with a little more detail on his perspective. But just remember, competent substantial evidence requires some basis in the opinion. That's an expert opinion, and you have not received any competent substantial evidence against the application today. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Board, I appreciate your time again today. Everything you've heard here today from our perspective, as well as my neighbors, with all due respect to them, every comment or concern they've had, I think we've significantly substantiated. We are not only addressing, but we are correcting those prior concerns quite substantially from what existed currently here today. We are reducing the building impact, the driveway lanes. I don't know kind of whether it's have your cake or eat it too, but they don't want cars to be parked there in the driveway lane and sit there for lengthy periods of time. So we added 2 lanes, flow traffic through, get them in and out of the property quicker, smoother, without backup, without that. So we kind of planned for these ahead of time. The The noise, the hours of operation, the congregation. This is not something, and I think Bill mentioned, customer cannot come here after hours to use the vacuums. They cannot come here after hours to use the air sprayer or the water or whatever it may be. We have employees that will be there now on site to enforce a lot of our rules about noise and volume and radio. The whole kind of general hours of operation. You can drive through Pinellas and Hillsborough County all day long. You don't see these express car washes open generally once the hours go down, once sunset. Usually there's some overflow, clean up, close everything down, turn everything off, clean up any debris that's in the parking lot. But they're generally not open till 10 o'clock at night. So again, I just want to say that we have addressed all these things, the congregation, and I think this will be a significant reduction, not an expansion for a non-conforming use.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that closes the public hearing. We'll have some discussion by the board.
Madam Chair, if you'd allow me a moment, just because I know we do have newer members, and I or my colleague are tasked with providing you legal advice. I am reticent when applicants or their agents give you legal advice. I do want to say that to the extent representation has been made concerning what the law recognizes as competent substantial evidence in a quasi-judicial hearing, that was an accurate statement of the law.
Thank you.
An accurate statement of the law. It was an article an accurate statement of the legal standard concerning competent substantial evidence.
All right, thank you, counsel.
I have a question. Can we ask any questions of the owner at this point, or is it just conversation with us?
At this point, it is for the body to deliberate.
Okay, that's fine.
Mike?
I have a couple of questions, if I might.
Sir, at this point, we are deliberating.
This is
Correct.
just
There's
time for
been,
discussion by the board.
this is for the body to deliberate amongst itself. Several questions.
Has there been an agreement as far as the wall yet, or is that still kind of open as far as?
For purposes of the open meeting, if you could direct any statements into your microphones and not among each other.
I was just wondering, is the wall still part of this conversation, or is it as far as what they've agreed
In as much
to
as,
do?
so today what you've heard was a evolved discussion concerning the wall, and the applicant has stated that it is amenable to I believe it was described as pier and lentil or prefabricated wall system. The city has stated that it is amenable with masonry, that it is also amenable to that, provided of course that can be ameliorated with all engineering requirements for all the things that you've heard in the testimony that prevented that previously. If that can be achieved, the applicant is amenable to that. So for your purposes, you can place that as a condition or a modified condition, and I believe city staff provided you proposed language for that condition. If you'd like city staff to restate it, not question and probe it at length, but restate what their recommendation had been to ameliorate the position of the parties, they are able to do so.
Because I remember they also said that they wanted a more substantial wall. I think the applicant has provided it.
Sir, sorry, if you could speak into the microphone, it's very difficult for the public to hear you.
Oh, there. Sorry. I was looking for this. Anyway, yeah, so it sounds like the applicant is amenable to providing this a more substantial wall, which I thought that the owners of the adjacent property wanted. And I think he's done, his he's provided that and we don't even know what, for him anyway, what the cost is going to be, because obviously it's more substantial than a PVC fence. So I just wanted to understand that.
Right. And I think if I have any concern about having the masonry wall be a modified condition number 4, it is that if ultimately as the development work is done on that, it turns out it's not possible. And my question would be, should we approve that with a backup condition of the 6-foot PVC fence? As something to drop back to it for whatever reason, all of the work that needs to be done to create a masonry wall option turns out to be, I don't want us to approve something based upon that and then have the whole project fail because they can't develop the masonry wall option.
That's a very good point.
In as much as if your statement was a question to council, can we create an if-then condition? Yes, you can. To the extent your statement said whether we should or not, that is for you to decide as a body.
Right, right. All right. Anyone else have comments?
I have comments.
All right, Mr. Flannery?
I had thought maybe I could ask for some clarification at this point, but apparently not. The two concerns I would wish I could ask would have been a general idea of why the traffic in the proposal was down about 30%. I do not need a traffic engineer to tell me, it has to do with probably operation. I didn't ask it at that time because I figured it would just come out eventually, but I would sure like to know just why it operates differently, that cuts it down.
I suspect the reason is because they use a model, that's a traffic engineering model, and the model that they use for the original one is probably 24 hours, and this is not.
So if that were the case, that would explain that. Then I would wish there was something that in the record that said what hours they would operate, as opposed to right now, they're not normally, but I do not see any limits in the write-up that says they're not going to operate. I mean, if it says something will turn off.
And your testimony, your city has advised you that it does not regulate hours of operation as a condition of application. And to the extent you said that you would have liked to have seen something in the record, the applicant's summation in its closing was an unequivocal statement that it would operate during what it described as daylight hours and certainly not 24 hours. It made an unequivocal commitment in that regard. So that is to the extent you're just looking for something in the record is not limited to the printed materials, but as well to the testimony offered before you today.
So that is in the record?
Sir,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
The one thing I wish that we had the opportunity to ask is the throughput on the car wash. I know because I use Tommy's, it's near my office. It takes about 90 seconds to go through the car wash. I don't know if theirs is that fast, but that would mean you'd be a lot of throughput during the day. There wouldn't be a reason to have it open late. And I can't imagine, Tommy's never has anybody stage there, although they have a lot of staging space. So I don't know if that means anything at all, but that's what I've seen in operation.
On a practical level, you speaking about throughput, speaking to the residents' concerns of, loitering or hanging out, spending time, I'm no car wash expert. My understanding is, generally folks are going to get in and get out. So to me, that's an improvement of the property. As it relates to the time, it sounds to me like it's a 24-hour car wash now, and it will not be in the future. So to me, that's also an additional improvement. In terms of proximity to the neighbors, while I am certainly sympathetic and understand how they would feel if I lived there, to me, the building is moving farther away. The applicant is willing to comply with a wall at a minimum of 4, it sounds like up to 6. I'm hesitant to vote on something that gets too specific in terms of tying into a wall, because I understand permitting, and if the type system wall doesn't fit in with a tree or with a swift mud or whoever it may be, my concern would be to go too deep into that. So I would suggest we move it to a 6-foot wall and leave it at that level. Landscaping is improving, and that, aside from just my personal feelings on it improving the property, city staff, who I would consider greater experts than me in code, has approved the project. So just for clarity's sake, I'll be voting to approve this project.
Anybody else?
We get a lot of projects in front of us, and looking at what neighbors have said, and as I state, sympathetic to that. And this particular use has been there for 22 years in the existing condition that it is, and it's no disrespect to the owner, but it is not very eye-appealing going down the road on Sunset Point Road as we go by it every single day, let alone if I was living next to it. I think, not all projects are perfect and meet everybody's criteria of what they'd like to see. But when you start looking at the things that were all complained about, the landscaping is going to have a drastic improvement. The buffering is going to have a drastic improvement. They're moving the building away, the structures away from the neighboring property. We're going from 6 bays. I know the city doesn't like this, any use that's going on the city with bays facing the street front. We're going from 6 bays facing the street, if I'm correct, down to 1 bay, which is
drastic improvement. So from the city, from the street perspective, that visual perspective, even though they've got it on the building, it is going way down. Even though you have that architectural element, I'm familiar with that element and use, you know, I hear what you're saying, Mike, you know, the vice versa is, oh, I'm going to that project versus, oh, I passed it up because I didn't see it. Now I got to make a U-turn at Sunset and Belcher to come on back versus knowing, oh, it's right up there the road. I'm not going to pass it up. So, you know, there's a quid pro quo side of everything. The reduced traffic counts, I appreciate that a lot. Any street that happens in the city and the peak hours. I think I would be reluctant, as you would too, on the getting into particulars, but we had an applicant that's agreeable to go into the 6 foot and straight from the pier and lintel outside of it. I think that it's brought up. I do think that it'll help out quite a bit on the sound attenuation than a PVC fence. It's not going to stop it, but it's going to be deflecting. You know, you're not going to get into attenuation. This isn't a sound room or anything like that. So it's going to be deflecting that, and it'll be a little bit better than, it's going to be a lot better than what's there right now because there isn't anything. I mean, it's the bushes and the trees and everything else, but, you know, the pier and lintel, I mean, those things that's what's built along the highway system, as you mentioned. I mean, that's why it's there. It's not only for the not seeing the cars, it's to deflect that noise so it goes up and it doesn't go into the residential areas.
Yeah, specifically for that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I mean, I think they're trying to address, you know, the concerns. I'd be more remiss if there was a vacant piece of property as it sits, but it's not. So with that number 4 adjustment on that, I think that I would totally lend support to.
And just for purposes, if you could be just a little bit more specific when you say that, with that number 4.
I'm sorry, yeah, number 4, item number 4 on the conditions of improvement to go to the 6 foot high pier and lintel outside of the easement area adjacent to the drive aisle.
Can I ask a question on that? Which I would be okay to approve that as well. I guess my question is, if for whatever reason during the permitting process, engineering or SwiftMud or, you know, whatever agency says, hey, the proposed fence system does not work for XYZ reasons, where does that leave the project?
Now, that's why I would like to add as a part of the modification to item 4, that in the event those types of things impair the project going forward, could we have, as a fallback position, the 6 foot PVC fence? And although I recognize that the masonry wall option may be somewhat better in terms of mitigating noise and all of the other concerns of the neighbors, I'm prepared to accept the testimony we've heard today that the 6 foot PVC fence will sufficiently mitigate those kinds of concerns, so that that's an adequate backup, fallback position should the masonry wall option not pan out.
I think that's a fair statement. I'm in agreement.
So presently, the language in number 4, for the benefit of all present, states that prior to the issuance of any building construction permit, excluding demolition and clearing and grubbing, a revised landscape plan and site plan are submitted, which provides substantial buffering on the west property line by providing at minimum a 4 foot high PVC fence outside the easement and without impacting the existing trees to be retained. The fence shall be of a neutral color and texture to be complementary to the building design. The fence placement shall allow for access of the landscaping on the west side of the fence. The fence shall be reviewed and finalized to the satisfaction of city staff. My suggestion to you would be that you change in that text that providing at minimum a 4 foot high, change that to 6 foot high, and instead of PVC fence, language that says pier and lintel fence of masonry material, leave the rest in as it is, and where that ends, that the fence shall be reviewed and finalized to the satisfaction of city staff. Failing compliance of the proposed pier and lintel, alternatively, a 6 foot PVC fence subject to the same conditions and review and approval to the satisfaction of city staff. So it basically is, you keep that, and then you give that fallback if that is the direction you are choosing to go. I'm not suggesting that's what you need to do. It is your prerogative as a body, what condition, how to phrase that condition. And again, if you believe there to be a more suitable arrangement, that can still be considered.
At this point in time, is anyone prepared to make a motion with the modification of condition 4 along the lines just stated?
I would make a motion, but I need someone
To articulate it.
So, I'm trying to be precise here. You would make a motion, but you need someone to articulate it as it relates to that condition, is that correct, sir? Correct. Okay. So, the motion on the floor, if you were to adopt what I've suggested to you, would be in condition 4, the language states, following rest property line by providing at minimum a 4-foot high, strike 4 foot, replace it with 6 foot high, and presently it reads in the 4th line of paragraph 4, PVC fence, pier and lentil masonry fence, leave the remaining paragraph as it reads. Give me a moment. Absent city approval, alternative buffering in the form of a 6-foot high PVC fence satisfying all remaining conditions otherwise previously set forth. So that gives you an A and B, with the A being the stated preference of the masonry pier and lentil fence. That, I believe, captures that. The language has been stated into the record. Member Park, is it your desire to move to approve this subject to the limited edit of the 4th condition as stated?
Yes, which I'm still not sure I'll say correctly.
I'm not asking you to parrot the language, but rather affirm that the statement made, which would change the reference from 4-foot high to 6-foot high, and PVC to pier and lentil masonry, as the testimony in the record is that is an understood term of art, and then leave the rest of the paragraph intact, and then add a clause that says absent city approval, and that is understood to mean the permitting approval and design review, etc., that is otherwise already contemplated there. Absent city approval, alternative buffering in the form of a 6-foot high PVC fence satisfying all remaining conditions otherwise previously set forth. And so are you amenable, is that the motion you wish to make?
Yes.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Member Hodgecourt seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
So let's do that. It's best that that be done by roll call vote, with the note that Mr. Abdul Rahim, as an alternate with all present, it does not have voting ability. So it would be a motion to approve the application subject to condition 4 as modified. And roll call vote.
They need to read a statement for their approval of the motion.
The motion has been to approve the application subject to all 13 conditions as modified in number 4. If there is a...
It's like it also states that, I don't have the language.
Member Rector?
Madam Chair, I move to approve case number FLD 2022-02006, based on the evidence and testimony presented in the application, the staff report, and at today's hearing, and hereby adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law stated in the staff report with conditions of approval as just modified and stated.
Second.
All right, let's vote again. A roll call vote?
Roll call vote.
All right. Beginning with Mr. Rector?
Vote yes to
Aye.
approve.
Aye.
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 Motion stands approved unanimously.
All right.
That concludes the hearing on this application.
All right, we have one final item on our agenda this afternoon, and that is with directors.
Good afternoon, Gina Clayton. I just wanted to talk to you briefly about whether or not you've had an opportunity to access the agenda and the materials through the online portal. I know we have a lot of new members, but we had previously talked about whether you were interested in moving to the online agenda. So I just want to bring it up today to see if you've had an opportunity to check it out yet, and if so, what's your feedback? Or do you still want to move forward with all the paper plans?
I'd like to give particularly the new board members
Yeah, right.
ample opportunity.
And you may have not had an opportunity, and if not, moving forward, maybe you could try it over the next couple of months and, tell us whether you'd like to go online or stay with paper.
As for me, I can tell you that I'm almost certainly the most technophobic person on the board, and I have not had any difficulty going through the files online, so that's not an issue for me any longer.
You send the link one more time to everybody.
We can do that, yes.
Let me just, and I haven't tried it in a while.
Okay.
I'm gonna need that because my firewall software was looked at as this is junk mail. I had my tech guy take a look at it, and we've got it worked out. So that's why it's been difficult to get me on the email.
And just to make a decision, perhaps we could go with the hard copies of the materials as we have been doing for, let's say, another 3 months, and then revisit it again.
What I could do is I could have Isabel, our new administrative assistant, call each of you, walk you through it, do that, and then you can work with it a few months, and then you can make a decision then. I mean, I'm not trying to push you to go in that direction.
Right.
If you're interested, we can, and if not, you can, want paper, we'll still do paper. It's not an issue.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Great. And just one last announcement. Tonight we have our second public workshop for the North Greenwood CRA meeting. That starts at 6:30 at the Rec Center in the North Greenwood neighborhood. And would like to see you all there if you can come.
Thank you.
And Mr. Petrocchi had a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I just want to, and hope I don't get any stones thrown at me. Since I've been on the board here, we've had a lot of issues like this come on up, and one of the things that has been repetitive coming back and coming back and coming back is our notices to owners. And what we've got in the code, and it's been there for a code, the limitation of the amount of notices that we have for 200 feet from any particular rezoning and things of that nature. And it's been consistent in the 4 or 5 years that I've been up here. And I think it might be something that's outdated a little bit. It really isn't, with lot owners, I mean, you're talking 2 lots then or something with the residential side. And after all, we're here, not only the business side of it, but the residential side too. I think that I just felt that I needed to make a statement that, if we could look at that when it comes up for, reviewing our city code and our policies, that we look at least doubling that to 400 feet or some particular, people are throwing out 1,000 feet. It would be great if we could notify everybody in the city of every single thing, but that's just not practical. So, but to think 200 feet is a little bit on the low side of it too. I've been convinced of that. So, and it's just a comment I wanted to make, to bring on out and go on the record with, so.
Thank you for bringing that up. There's lots of places in the city on the water, 200 feet away is nobody.
One lot, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd support you expanding that or being looked at. Thank you.
I don't know what the right number is, but I think we need to look at it. That's all.
All right. Anything further? If not, the meeting's adjourned at 3:24.